A millionaire CEO walked into his opulent bathroom and discovered a cleaning lady fast asleep on the toilet lid, and, against all odds, found himself falling hopelessly in love. Part 2. When the sun rose, Ilara knew what she had to do. She sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed, her heart heavy, her fingers trembling as she typed out the message. "I think I'd better go home. Thanks for the opportunity, but I don't belong in this world." She stared at the words on the screen, her chest tightening. It hurt more than she expected, admitting defeat. But it was better to leave now, before she embarrassed herself even more, before she ruined everything. Taking a deep breath, she hit send. There. It was done. She let out a shaky sigh, her shoulders sagging. Now all she had to do was wait for Lucian's response. He would understand. He'd probably be relieved that she was making it easy for him. But the reply came faster than she expected. "Meet me at the restaurant in 10 minutes. Ilara's heart sank. Of course he wouldn't make it easy. She dragged herself to the bathroom, her reflection looking just as exhausted and defeated as she felt. With a resigned sigh, she pulled on the best outfit she had, the one Celine had insisted she bring, just in case. It didn't make her look rich, but it was good enough to avoid attracting attention. She took one last look at her suitcase, already half-packed, and tried to ignore the ache in her chest. Lucian was waiting for her at the hotel restaurant, seated at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of him. His posture was relaxed, but his expression was anything but. He looked up as she approached, his eyes dark and unreadable. Ilara hesitated, her stomach twisting, before she forced herself to sit across from him. "Good morning." Lucian's jaw tightened, his fingers curling around his coffee cup. "You think you can just send me a message like that and run away?" Ilara's throat tightened. "I'm not running away. I'm being realistic." He crossed his arms, his gaze never leaving hers. "Realistic?" She looked down, her fingers twisting nervously. "Yes. Look, Lucian, I appreciate everything you've done, but it doesn't make sense for me to stay here." Lucian didn't respond immediately. He just watched her, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to read her mind. Finally, he tilted his head, his voice low. "This is about Lyra." Ilara's heart stopped, her eyes widening. "What? No, of course not." Lucian smirked, his eyes gleaming. "You disappeared right after you saw us talking." Ilara felt heat rush to her face. She looked away, her fingers clenching. "I was just tired." "Collins." His voice was firm, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're not good at lying." Ilara's jaw tightened. She grabbed a piece of bread, spreading butter on it with more force than necessary. "It has nothing to do with that. I just think it was a mistake to accept this trip." "Why?" Lucian's voice was calm, but his eyes were intense, unrelenting. Lucera's hand froze, the butter knife clattering onto the plate. She looked up, her eyes blazing with frustration. "Because I'm not like you, Lucian. I'm not sophisticated. I don't speak French. I don't know how to act at these events. You saw the way Lyra looked at me, the way everyone looks at me. Like I don't belong." Lucian's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with anger. "So, that's it? You want to quit just because a few snobby people can't handle the fact that you're more talented than they are?" Ilara's chest tightened. "I'm not more talented than anyone. I'm just a housekeeper who got lucky." Lucian's eyes darkened, his voice low and serious. "You're not here because of luck." Ilara opened her mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come out. Lucian leaned forward, his gaze fierce. "You think I brought you here for nothing? You think I waste my time with people who don't matter? I don't bring anyone into my world unless they've earned it." Ilara's heart skipped a beat, her throat tightening. I just don't want people to think that I'm only here because of you." Lucian's expression softened, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then prove them wrong." Ilara's lips trembled, her chest aching. "I don't know how." "Yes, you do," Lucian said, his voice firm. "You proved it yesterday, and the day before that. Every time you open your mouth, people listen. Because you see things no one else does. Because you have something no one else has." Ilara looked away, her vision blurring. "I just don't want to embarrass you." Lucian's voice softened, his eyes warm. "You won't." Ilara swallowed, her fingers twisting in her lap. "You don't know that." Lucian leaned back, his eyes never leaving her. "You don't get it, do you?" Ilara frowned. "Get what? You think I care what these people think? You think I brought you here to fit in?" His lips curved into a small, almost sad smile. I brought you here because you're different, because you don't care about their rules, because you're honest. And that's exactly what I need. Ilara's chest tightened, her heart racing. But I don't belong here. Lucian's eyes softened, his voice low and sincere. You belong wherever you want to be, Ilara, and I want you here. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart skipping a beat. She looked away, her cheeks burning. I don't know if I can do this. Lucian stood up, his movements calm and controlled. He pulled a card from his pocket and placed it on the table, his eyes never leaving hers. You have until noon to decide if you want to leave. There's a flight back home reserved for you. But if you want to stay, meet me in the main hall at 3 p.m. Ilara's eyes widened. You already booked a flight? Lucian's expression was unreadable. I always have a backup plan. Ilara looked down at the card, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. A plane ticket. One way. Back home. Lucian's voice was calm, his gaze steady. It's your choice, Ilara. No one's going to make it for you. She looked up, her eyes searching his face. Why? Why are you giving me a choice? But Lucian's lips curved into a small, almost sad smile. Because you deserve it. Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, his posture strong and confident, his footsteps echoing through the restaurant. Ilara sat there, staring at the plane ticket in her hands, her heart pounding. If she left, she could go back to her old life. She could go back to what was familiar, what was safe. But if she stayed, Ilara's fingers tightened around the card, her jaw clenching. If she stayed, she could prove to herself and to everyone else that she belonged here. And Ilara Collins never ran from anything. When the clock struck 3, Ilara was standing in the main hall, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. She had changed her outfit 3 times before settling on the one that made her feel the most confident. A sleek, tailored dress borrowed from Celine that was just understated enough not to draw too much attention, but elegant enough to make her feel like she belonged. Lucian was already there, standing by the marble staircase with his arms crossed, his expression as unreadable as ever. When his eyes met hers, he didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed just a fraction, and there was a flicker of something like satisfaction in his gaze. Good, he said, his voice calm and steady. Now stop acting like you don't deserve to be here and come with me. Ilara's heart skipped a beat, her chest tightening, but then she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and followed him without hesitation. For the first time since she arrived, she decided she was going to do exactly that. That afternoon's event was one of the most important of the entire food conference, a showcase of new talents in international cuisine attended by top chefs, critics, and investors from all over the world. It was where rising stars were discovered, where reputations were made or broken. Lucian had meetings with investors and industry insiders, and Ilara was tasked with attending a panel about emerging trends and innovative cooking techniques. She sat near the front, her notebook open, determined to soak up everything she could. She listened intently to the experts, their voices confident and eloquent, their knowledge so vast it was almost overwhelming. But she didn't let herself feel intimidated. Instead, she focused on every detail, analyzing the ideas they presented, comparing them to the dishes she had tasted. What made a dish truly memorable? What separated the good from the exceptional? Her pen flew across the page as she jotted down notes, her mind racing with ideas and questions. She was so focused that she almost didn't hear the whispering behind her. Almost, did you see that girl with Lucian Scott? Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She kept her eyes on the panelists, pretending she wasn't listening. Yeah, they say he picked up a cleaning lady and brought her to Paris. Ilara's stomach tightened, her fingers clenching around her pen. Must be some kind of whim of his, or maybe she has something special he likes, if you know what I mean. The 2 women laughed, their voices low and conspiratorial. Ilara felt her face flush, a cold wave of shame washing over her. But then anger replaced the shame, hot and fierce. She wasn't going to let this bother her. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her react. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders, her heart pounding. She turned around, her face calm, her expression sweet as honey. "Oh, thank you so much for caring so much about my life," she said in the most saccharine tone she could muster, her smile wide and innocent. "I'd love to continue this conversation, but I really need to get back to the panel. After all, I'm actually here working. Can you say the same?" The two women stared at her, their mouths dropping open, their faces turning a satisfying shade of pink. Ilara blinked, her smile never faltering. "Didn't think so." She turned back to face the panel, her head high, her shoulders straight. Her heart was still pounding, her hands shaking just a little. But as the women behind her fell silent, too stunned to speak, Ilara felt something lift inside her. Confidence. She wasn't going to let small-minded people drag her down. She wasn't going to let their pettiness make her feel like she didn't belong. Because she did belong. She had worked hard, she had talent, and she had earned her place here. Not because of Lucien, but because of her own abilities. For the rest of the panel, Ilara kept her focus on the speakers, taking notes, soaking up knowledge, refusing to let anyone's judgment distract her. She didn't have time to worry about small people. When she met Lucien at the end of the event, he was waiting for her by the entrance. His posture relaxed, but his eyes alert, as if he had been keeping an eye on her from afar. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her face. "You look different." Ilara's lips curved into a smile, her confidence shining through. "Do I?" Lucien's eyes narrowed, his head tilting. "What happened?" She shrugged, her smile never wavering. "I think I finally understand why I'm here." His eyebrow arched, curiosity flickering across his face. "And why is that?" Ilara met his gaze head-on, her chin lifted, her voice steady. "Because I'm good at this." Lucien's lips curved into a slow, satisfied smirk. Finally. Ilara's heart skipped, warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel like a fraud. She didn't feel like she was pretending. She felt light, confident, free. Because she was here. Not because Lucien chose her, not because she got lucky, but because she was talented. Because she deserved to be. Lucien's eyes softened, his expression almost proud. "Good. Now let's show the rest of them." Ilara's smile widened, her heart pounding with anticipation. "You really think they're ready for me?" Lucien's laughter was warm, genuine. "Not even close." And with that he turned, leading the way out of the hall, his posture strong and confident. Ilara followed, her head held high, her shoulders squared. She was no longer an outsider, no longer an imposter. She was Ilara Collins, and she was ready to take on the world. Ilara never thought she could feel so comfortable in a place that, just a few days ago, seemed completely out of her reach. But there she was, sitting next to Lucien Scott, evaluating dishes with some of the world's top food critics, analyzing flavors with precision and confidence. She asked questions that made seasoned chefs pause and reconsider their own creations. She pointed out subtle nuances in texture, balance, and seasoning that most people would have missed. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was in the wrong place. People still whispered when she walked by. They still looked at her like she was an outsider, like she didn't belong in their world of wealth and sophistication. But she didn't care anymore. She wasn't going to apologize for being there, and she definitely wasn't going to let anyone intimidate her into leaving. Somehow that seemed to bother people more than if she had just given up and walked away. The night came quickly, and Lucien organized an exclusive dinner at one of the most renowned restaurants in Paris, inviting a select group of guests. The setting was breathtaking. Elegant chandeliers casting a golden glow over tables set with fine china and crystal glasses. Soft classical music played in the background, and the aroma of exquisite dishes filled the air. Ilara sat beside Lucien, surrounded by culinary elites who discussed techniques and trends with passionate intensity. And this time she didn't feel like a fraud. She joined the conversation, sharing her insights, her opinions flowing naturally as she engaged with people she once thought were unreachable. She was learning. Every word, every dish, every critique was teaching her something new. She was soaking it all up, and Lucien noticed. "You're more confident," he said, after the waiter served dessert, a delicate creation of spun sugar and velvety chocolate mousse. Ilara picked up her fork, cutting through the dessert with precision. "Do I seem more confident, or am I finally—" Lucien's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Both." Ilara took a bite of the dessert, letting the flavors melt on her tongue. "The balance is perfect. Not too sweet, not too bitter. The texture is flawless." Lucien watched her, his eyes gleaming with approval. "You're finally seeing it. The details, the complexity." Ilara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm starting to understand what makes a dish unforgettable." Lucien leaned in, his voice low. "That's why you're here. You have an instinct for this. You just needed to trust it. Elara felt her cheeks warm, and she quickly took a sip of wine to cover up her blush. She was feeling good, confident, even happy. But then Lyra arrived. She swept into the restaurant like she owned the place, her head held high, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her figure wrapped in a designer dress that probably cost more than Elara's entire wardrobe. She moved with practiced grace, her every step calculated to draw attention. She approached the table, her eyes gleaming as she took in the scene. She looked at Elara with a smile that was sharp enough to cut. "Darling, what a surprise to see you here." Elara didn't flinch. She met Lyra's gaze head-on and returned the smile with one of her own. "I'm not a surprise anymore. I'm starting to become part of this world." Lyra's eyebrows shot up, her smile faltering for just a second before she regained her composure. "Is that what you think?" Lucian's voice cut through the tension, his tone cool. "What brings you here, Lyra?" Lyra picked up a glass of wine from a passing waiter, swirling the liquid elegantly before taking a delicate sip. A friendly warning. Elara raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Oh, that sounds interesting. Please, go on." Lyra's eyes flicked to Lucian, her gaze sharp. "You know this world is a game, and as much as you like to challenge yourself, Lucian, there are things that simply don't fit in it." Elara felt the jab, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to give Lyra the satisfaction of seeing her react. Lucian's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "If you have something to say, Lyra, say it already." Lyra's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Have you ever stopped to think about how this might hurt your image? Bringing a cleaning lady to Paris, introducing her as if she's some kind of expert? People talk, Lucian, and believe me, not everyone is happy about it." Elara's blood boiled, her hands curling into fists under the table. She wanted to snap back, to put Lyra in her place, but Lucian spoke first. "Who cares what they say?" His voice was steady, unbothered. Lyra's laughter was cold, mocking. "You do, darling. Deep down, you've always cared. You wouldn't have gotten where you are if you didn't know how to play this game." Lucian held her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "Funny. I always thought the game was about talent, and Elara has that in spades." Lyra's eyes darkened, her lips tightening. "You really think that's enough?" Elara's patience snapped. She put down her wine glass and turned to Lyra, her voice calm but firm. "Lyra, let me ask you something." Lyra's eyes widened, clearly not expecting Elara to challenge her. "What?" Elara's gaze was steady, her voice unwavering. "What exactly bothers you so much? The fact that I'm here, or the fact that you can't bring me down?" A heavy silence fell over the table, the tension palpable. Lyra's face hardened, her eyes flashing with anger, before she quickly masked it with a practiced smile. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Elira's smile was sharp, her confidence unshakable. "I am smart, and you know that." Lucian's eyes sparkled with amusement as he watched the exchange, his lips curving into a satisfied smirk. Lyra's jaw clenched, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. She looked at Lucian, her voice icy. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." She stood up, smoothing her dress with a flick of her wrist before walking away, her head held high. She didn't look back. Elara exhaled slowly, her body relaxing as the tension left her. She picked up her wine glass, taking a long sip before setting it down. "If she's going to be a recurring problem, I'll need a raise." Lucian's laughter was rich, his eyes gleaming with admiration. "You're already negotiating salary?" Elara grinned, her confidence radiating. "I'm learning fast." Lucian raised his glass, his gaze locked on hers. To fast learners, Elara clinked her glass against his, a thrill of excitement rushing through her. To never backing down. But even as they toasted, she knew this wasn't over. Lyra wasn't the kind of woman to accept defeat easily. Elara would have to watch her back, because in this world, enemies didn't attack head-on. They waited, they plotted, and when you least expected it, they struck. Elara was ready. She wasn't going down without a fight. Elara noticed something had changed after that night. It wasn't just Lyra. The entire atmosphere around her had shifted. Before, people looked at her with curiosity, like she was an oddity, a novelty. They watched her cautiously, as if waiting for her to trip, to stumble, to fall flat on her face so they could laugh and confirm their suspicions that she didn't belong. Now, the hostility was open. She had become a problem, and it didn't take long for her to feel it in her bones. The next day, they attended an exclusive food event, one of the most prestigious gatherings of culinary talent in the world. Chefs, critics, and investors filled the grand hall, their voices mingling with the soft clinking of crystal glasses and the murmur of refined conversation. Elara walked in beside Lucian, her posture straight, her head high, determined to show no fear. But the moment they entered, the whispers began. But this time it wasn't just quiet muttering behind cupped hands. This time, they didn't bother to hide it. She was a maid at his hotel, can you believe it? He brought an amateur to Paris and pretended she was an expert. The nerve. There's only one reason she's here, and it has nothing to do with food. Elara's chest tightened, her jaw clenching as the words pierced through her like arrows. Her hands curled into fists, her fingernails digging into her palms. She could feel the stares, the judging eyes, the silent accusations. They weren't just questioning her qualifications. They were questioning her character, her worth. She felt anger bubble up inside her, hot and fierce, but she forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Lucian was far less calm. His shoulders were tense, his jaw set, his eyes flashing with anger as he glared at the people around them. A few had the decency to look away, their faces paling as they realized they had been caught gossiping. "Collins," he said, his voice low and firm, "ignore them." Elara's lips tightened. "Easy for you to say." Lucian stopped, turning to face her fully. His eyes were blazing, his expression hard. "You want to prove you belong here? Then act like you don't care about these idiots. The only way to win this game is not to play by their rules." Elara swallowed, his words sinking in. He was right. If she let them get to her, if she showed even a hint of insecurity, she'd be giving them exactly what they wanted. She took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. She lifted her chin, ignored the stares, and walked confidently through the room beside Lucian, refusing to look back. The real surprise of the night came later when they were introduced to one of the world's most respected food critics. Xavier Moro. Elara's heart skipped a beat as they approached him. He was legendary in the culinary world, known for his sharp palate and even sharper words. An older man with silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and a refined air about him, Moro's opinion could make or break a chef's career. "Mr. Scott," Moro greeted, his French accent smooth and elegant. "A pleasure to see you again." Lucian shook his hand, his posture relaxed. "Xavier, it's been too long." Moro's eyes shifted to Elara, his gaze sharp and curious. "And you must be Elara Collins." Elara's eyes widened, her heart pounding. You've heard of me?" Moro's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Oh, ma chère, the whole of Paris has heard of you." Lucian's eyes sparkled with amusement, but he stayed silent, letting Elara absorb the shock. Elara's stomach flipped. "The whole of Paris?" Moro laughed softly, his eyes gleaming. "People love a scandal, especially one that challenges the established order. But I prefer facts." He gestured to a waiter, who immediately brought over a tasting plate. "So, Miss Collins, let's see if you live up to the rumors. Tell me, what do you think of this dish?" Elara's heart raced, her fingers trembling as she took the plate. She was acutely aware of the eyes on her. The entire room had gone silent, all attention focused on her. This was a test. A public test. And failure wasn't an option. She took a breath, steadying herself, and picked up the fork. She tasted the food slowly, letting the flavors wash over her tongue, her mind analyzing every element. The sauce was rich, the seasoning balanced, but "It's technically flawless," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But it's predictable. The sauce is a classic, but it lacks a touch of freshness. A hint of citrus would brighten the flavors and balance the richness." The room went silent. Elara's heart thudded in her chest, her eyes fixed on Moro, waiting for his reaction. She was bracing herself for laughter, for mocking smiles, for rejection. But Moro smiled, his eyes sparkling with intrigue. Elara blinked, her breath catching. "Interesting how?" Moro handed the plate back to the waiter, crossing his arms. "Because you're right." A collective gasp echoed through the room, eyes widening in surprise. Moro's gaze never wavered. "Most people would have praised the technical skill and missed the bigger picture. You saw the flaw others overlooked, and you were honest about it." Elara's throat tightened, her vision blurring. She had done it. She had spoken the truth, and she hadn't been laughed at. She had been respected. Lucian's voice was calm, confident. "I told you she was good." Moreau's eyes softened, his tone sincere. "Mademoiselle Collins, I'll be watching your career with great interest." He gave her a respectful nod before turning away, his presence leaving a hush in his wake. Elara let out the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her body sagging with relief. Her hands were still shaking, but her heart felt light, exhilarated. Lucian leaned in close, his voice low and warm. "Now they know you're not playing around." Elara looked up at him, her eyes shining. Did I just pass the ultimate test?" Lucian's smile was soft, almost proud. "You didn't just pass, you set the standard." For the first time, Elara felt like she'd won a battle, like she had earned her place in this world, not because of Lucian, but because of herself. But as she looked around, seeing the stunned faces, the wary eyes, the tightened jaws, she realized something else. Winning wasn't the end. Because when you start winning a dangerous game, people play dirtier, and Elara was just starting to see how far they'd go to take her down. The next morning, Elara's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "If you want to know the truth about Lucian Scott, come to the hotel bar." 3 p.m. Alone, Elara frowned, her heart skipping a beat. What the hell was that? Her first instinct was to forward the message to Lucian, and she did it without hesitation, but his response came almost immediately. "Don't go." Elara stared at her phone, a shiver running down her spine. If Lucian didn't want her to go, it meant there was something there, something he didn't want her to find out. She had two choices: obey him and stay away, or go and find out the truth for herself. And Elara Collins never walked away from the truth. At exactly 3 p.m., she was in the hotel bar. The elegant room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and aged whiskey. A jazz tune played softly in the background, creating an atmosphere of sophistication and intrigue. She sat at the corner table, her posture straight, her chin lifted. She wouldn't show any weakness. Not here. Not now. And then Lyra appeared. She walked in gracefully, her designer dress hugging every curve, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her lips curved into a knowing smile. She looked like she belonged in a movie, a femme fatale, dangerous and beautiful. "Oh, so you came?" Elara's eyes narrowed. "I'm curious, and you're obviously desperate to get my attention." Lyra laughed, a cold, melodious sound. She sat down across from Elara, crossing her long legs elegantly before signaling the waiter for a glass of wine. "You're smart, Collins, but you still don't know how this world works." Elara's lips tightened. "And you think you're going to teach me?" Lyra shook her head, a condescending smile on her lips. "I don't need to teach you anything. I just need to show you something." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone, swiping the screen before turning it to face Elara. Elara's heart stopped. On the screen was a photo of Lucian. With Lyra, they were at a romantic dinner, candlelight flickering between them, their faces close, their expressions warm. Lyra's hand rested on his arm, her body leaning toward him intimately. Elara's stomach dropped. What is this?" "A dinner," Lyra said smoothly, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You think you're the first woman Lucian brought to Paris?" Elara felt her chest tighten, her fingers clenching around her bag. "What do you mean?" Lyra's smile widened, her eyes flashing with malice. "Don't you get it? You're just a whim to him, a plaything, something to amuse him until he gets bored and moves on." Elara wanted to laugh, wanted to throw the accusation back in Lyra's face, but the image on the screen wouldn't leave her mind. She knew Lyra was manipulative, she knew she was trying to get under her skin, to plant doubts, but why had Lucian never mentioned Lyra? Why had he never explained what their relationship was? Had she been stupid? Had she been naive enough to believe she was different? Lyra watched her, her expression softening just enough to look almost sympathetic. "Leave while you still can, before he discards you like the others." Elara's chest burned with anger and humiliation, but she kept her voice steady. "Thanks for the concern, Lyra, but if Lucian wants to discard me, he'll have to face me and say it to my face." She stood up, her posture straight, her head high. "Enjoy the rest of your day." She didn't look back as she walked out of the bar, her heart pounding, her vision blurred with emotions she couldn't name. But the image of Lucian and Lyra stayed with her, and doubt crept into her mind, cold and suffocating. Had she been a fool this whole time? That night, when she returned to the hotel, Lucian was waiting for her in the hallway, his arms crossed, his expression dark. "I told you not to go." Ilara crossed her arms, her chin lifting defiantly. "And I went anyway." Lucian's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching. "You never listen." Her lips curved into a bitter smile. "Good luck trying to change that." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "What did she say to you?" Ilara hesitated, her chest tightening. She watched him carefully, searching his face for any sign of guilt, of deception. "She said, 'I'm just a whim of yours.'" Lucian's body went rigid, his eyes flashing with something dark and dangerous, his jaw clenched, his fists tightening. But he quickly regained his composure, his face becoming unreadable. "And you believed her?" Ilara's heart twisted. "I want to hear it from you." Lucian was silent, his eyes locked on hers, his expression cold and controlled. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Ilara," he said, his voice low and intense, "if I wanted a woman by my side just for amusement, I would have chosen one who didn't challenge me every step of the way." Her heart skipped a beat, her breath catching. "Then what am I to you?" Lucian's eyes softened, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're the woman who makes me break every rule I've set for myself." Ilara's chest tightened, her pulse racing. "You? You have rules?" He laughed, a soft, bitter sound. "I did, until you came along and shattered them." His gaze softened, his eyes warm and vulnerable. "And that scares me more than anything." Ilara's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. "Lucian." He took another step closer, his body mere inches from hers, his eyes locked on hers. "I've spent my life building walls, protecting myself. And you? You walked right through them as if they didn't exist." Ilara's knees felt weak, her resolve crumbling. "And that's a bad thing?" Lucian's lips curved into a sad smile, his eyes reflecting a pain she didn't understand. "It's terrifying." Before she could respond, he turned away, his shoulders tense. "Lyra's trying to tear you down because she can't stand that you're stronger than she is. And she's trying to tear me down because she can't stand that I chose you." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. "You chose me?" Lucian turned back to face her, his eyes burning with intensity. "I choose you every day, Ilara, even when it drives me insane." Her vision blurred, her heart aching. "Then don't push me away." Lucian's face softened, his eyes shimmering with vulnerability. "I'm not trying to." His voice lowered, his words a whisper. "I'm trying to hold on." Ilara felt tears prick at her eyes, her heart swelling with emotions she didn't know how to name. She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "Then hold on." And for the first time, Lucian didn't argue. He just closed the distance between them and let himself fall. Ilara's heart was pounding so loudly she was sure Lucian could hear it. She didn't expect that response. She didn't expect him to be so direct, so vulnerable. And most of all, she didn't expect him to leave her speechless. Lucian Scott, the serious, methodical CEO, the man who always seemed in control of every situation, had just admitted that she completely messed up his life. And the worst part? Ilara knew he was telling the truth. She could see it in his eyes, the way they softened when he looked at her, the way his posture relaxed just a fraction, as if he were letting down walls he had built long before they'd ever met. He was scared, just as scared as she was. But instead of feeling happy, instead of feeling triumphant, a wave of confusion washed over her, leaving her dizzy, off balance. This wasn't part of her plan. She never wanted this. She never wanted to fall for someone like him. And yet, here she was, standing in front of Lucian Scott, her heart pounding, her thoughts in chaos, her emotions spinning out of control. She didn't know what to do. Lucian watched her, his gaze steady, his eyes reflecting an emotion she couldn't name. He was waiting for her to say something, to react, to give him some sort of answer, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't even move. So after what felt like an eternity of silence, Lucian's expression shifted, his shoulders tensed, his jaw tightening as he stepped back, putting distance between them. "You'd better get some rest," he said, his voice controlled, almost cold. But she heard the change in his tone, the disappointment, the resignation. It hit her like a punch. Lucien was never one to show emotions. He was guarded, careful, always keeping his feelings under lock and key. But tonight, he had opened up to her. He had let his guard down, and she had just frozen. Without another word, he turned and walked down the hallway, his shoulders stiff, his stride purposeful. He didn't look back. Ilara watched him go, her chest tightening painfully, her heart screaming at her to call out to him, to say something, anything, to stop him from walking away, but she didn't. She couldn't. She just stood there, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. She entered her room, shutting the door behind her with a heavy thud. She leaned against it, her body sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. Her heart was still pounding, her pulse erratic, her mind replaying the conversation over and over again. "You're the woman who makes me break every rule I've set for myself." His voice echoed in her head, his words wrapping around her like a vice, squeezing the breath out of her. She ran her hands over her face, her fingers trembled. What was happening to her? She had never felt like this before. She had never been so confused, so lost, so completely out of control. She never allowed herself to feel anything for anyone. She never let herself get attached, never let herself depend on anyone, because she knew, better than anyone, that people always left. That had been her life, her entire life. Growing up, she had learned the hard way that people were temporary. Friends, family, lovers, they all left eventually. So she built walls, high, impenetrable walls that kept people out, that kept her heart safe. And now Lucien had walked right through them, shattering her defenses without even trying. He messed everything up. He made her feel things she didn't want to feel, made her hope for things she didn't think she deserved. And now, he wanted her to trust him, to believe in him. It was terrifying, but what scared her even more was the fact that she didn't want to run away. Her heart wanted to stay. It wanted to believe him, to trust him, to take the risk. Ilara buried her face in her hands, her chest aching. What was she supposed to do now? The next day, Ilara tried to act normal. She got dressed in her nicest outfit, applied her makeup carefully, and forced herself to smile in the mirror. She looked confident, composed, calm. She looked like nothing was wrong, but the truth was, everything had changed. She went to breakfast alone, sitting at the table where she and Lucien had eaten together so many times before. She ordered her usual, a croissant and hot chocolate, but it tasted like nothing. The chair across from her was empty. Lucien didn't show up. He didn't send any messages. He didn't even check in to make sure she was ready for the event. For the first time since they arrived in Paris, he was nowhere to be found. Ilara's chest tightened, her heart aching in a way she didn't expect. She missed him. She missed his teasing smile, his sharp wit, his steady presence. She missed the way he looked at her, the way he always knew when she was nervous, the way he believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. She missed him, and that terrified her more than anything. Taking a shaky breath, Ilara stood up, leaving her half-eaten breakfast behind. She couldn't sit here, waiting for him to show up, hoping he'd walk in and flash that cocky smile at her, pretending nothing had happened. She wouldn't wait for anyone, not even him. She went to the event alone, her head high, her posture straight. She forced herself to focus, to pay attention, to participate. She wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her falter. But every time she looked over her shoulder, every time she heard a familiar voice, her heart jumped, hoping it was him. And every time she realized he wasn't there, the ache in her chest grew heavier, because for the first time she realized just how much Lucien Scott meant to her, and just how badly she didn't want to lose him. The morning dragged on. Ilara went through the motions, attending tastings, nodding politely, scribbling down notes she didn't really read. She tried to focus on the dishes in front of her, on the flavors and techniques, on the details that had fascinated her only yesterday. But all she could think about was Lucien. Where was he? Why wasn't he here? Was he avoiding her? Was he regretting what he said last night? Was he disappointed in her? The questions gnawed at her, clawing at her insides until she felt hollow, empty. She tried to ignore the stares from others, the whispers that followed her wherever she went. She forced herself to stand tall, to keep her head high, to act like she didn't care. But she was falling apart inside, and he wasn't there. By late afternoon, Ilara was exhausted, emotionally, mentally, physically. She was in the main hall, analyzing a dish that she couldn't even taste, her mind elsewhere, her heart heavy. And that's when she heard the voice she least wanted to hear. Well, looks like someone's been left out. Ilara's body went rigid, her fists clenching at her sides. She closed her eyes for a second, willing herself to stay calm before she turned around. Lyra stood there, her blonde hair cascading perfectly over her shoulders, her lips curved into a victorious smile. "Of course. What do you want now?" Ilara asked, her voice cold. Lyra tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Oh, just checking on you. After your little heart-to-heart with Lucian last night, he seems distant." Ilara's chest tightened, her heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean by that?" Lyra's smile widened, her eyes sparkling with wicked delight. "Oh, sweetie, you really thought he was going to chase after you? Lucian Scott doesn't wait for anyone. If you're not willing to play the game, he'll find someone who will." Ilara's stomach churned, the words slicing through her, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to give Lyra the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. "You seem really concerned about me," Ilara said, her voice icy. "I didn't know you cared so much." Lyra's laughter was cold, mocking. "I'm just being realistic. He's already moved on. You were just a distraction, something to entertain him for a while, but it's over now." Ilara's heart ached, but she stood her ground, refusing to let the pain show. "Or maybe you're worried because you realize that this time Lucian chose someone he can't control." Lyra's eyes narrowed, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I do." Ilara took a step closer, her gaze locked on Lyra's. "You've been playing games, manipulating people to feel important. But the truth is, you're just scared." Lyra's expression hardened, her posture stiffening. "Scared? Of what?" Ilara's lips curved into a smirk. "Of losing, of becoming irrelevant, of realizing that you're not as powerful as you think." Ilara's jaw clenched, her eyes flashing with fury. "Do you really think he cares about you?" Ilara's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "I know he cares, but unlike you, I don't need to prove it to anyone. I don't need to control him. And that's why you're scared, because you can't control me either." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with tension. Lyra's eyes burned with anger, her hands curling into fists. But she said nothing. Ilara didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel and walked out of the room, her head held high, her shoulders straight. She didn't look back. Her heart was racing, her pulse pounding in her ears, but she felt lighter. She was done playing Lyra's game. She was done letting others define her worth. She was Ilara Collins, and she was going to fight for herself, because she knew one thing for sure. Lucian Scott wasn't like Lyra. He was stubborn and arrogant and infuriatingly guarded, but he was also honest and vulnerable and real, and she didn't want to run away from that. She wanted to face it head on. That night, Ilara couldn't stay still. She paced the length of her hotel room, her thoughts racing, her heart pounding. She couldn't stop thinking about Lucian, about the way he looked at her, about the way his words had shattered every wall she'd built around herself. She had tried to be strong, she had tried to pretend it didn't matter, but the truth was, she missed him. She missed his presence, his confidence, his infuriating ability to read her so easily. And she was done running. She knew where he was. She knew he was at the hotel's restaurant, having dinner with investors, probably discussing numbers and strategies and everything that made him who he was. But she didn't care. She needed to see him. Taking a deep breath, Ilara grabbed her coat and walked out of the room, her steps purposeful, her resolve firm. She wouldn't run anymore. The restaurant was elegant, dimly lit, the atmosphere refined and sophisticated. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the tables, soft music played in the background, and the aroma of exquisite dishes filled the air. Ilara scanned the room, her heart racing, her palms sweaty, and then she saw him. Lucian was sitting at the main table, surrounded by men in tailored suits, his posture relaxed, his expression focused. He was listening intently to one of the investors, his eyes sharp, his face serious. But then, as if he felt her presence, his eyes lifted, meeting hers from across the room. The world around them disappeared. The noise, the people, the elegant setting, None of it mattered. The only thing that existed was the space between them. Ilara's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She didn't know if it was her feet moving or if it was him. All she knew was that somehow they were standing face to face, staring at each other in silence. She could see the surprise in his eyes, the flicker of emotion he couldn't quite hide. But he stayed calm, his posture controlled, his expression guarded. "We need to talk," Ilara said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. Lucian studied her face, his eyes searching hers, his jaw tightening. But he didn't hesitate. He turned to the investors, his voice calm and polite. "Excuse me, gentlemen." Without another word, he took Ilara's hand and led her out of the restaurant. His grip was firm, warm, grounding, and she held on, letting him guide her through the maze of corridors until they reached a private balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cold, crisp, the lights of Paris glittering below like a sea of stars. The wind brushed against Ilara's skin, sending a shiver down her spine. But she didn't care, because all that mattered was the man standing in front of her. Lucien released her hand, slipping his hands into his pockets, his posture guarded as he turned to face her. "What's going on?" Ilara took a deep breath, her heart racing, her mind screaming at her to run, to protect herself, to hide. But she wouldn't run anymore. "You were right," she said, her voice low, her eyes fixed on his. Lucian's brow furrowed, his gaze cautious. "About what?" About me always running away," she swallowed, her throat tightening. "I never let anyone get close to me because I was always afraid that in the end people would leave. But you," she looked away, her chest aching. "You made me want to stay." Lucian didn't move, his face expressionless, but his eyes softened, his shoulders relaxing, just a little. I tried to convince myself that it didn't mean anything, but it does. And as much as that scares me, I don't want to run anymore. The silence between them was heavy, charged, electric. It carried the weight of everything unspoken, everything they'd been holding back for so long. Lucian's eyes darkened, his jaw clenching, his posture tense. He looked at her like he was fighting an internal battle, like he was on the edge of something he couldn't control. And then, without warning, he closed the distance between them. His hands cupped her face, his fingers trembling just a little as he tilted her head up, his eyes locking onto hers. His gaze was fierce, desperate, vulnerable. And then he kissed her. It was intense, fierce, desperate. His lips pressed against hers with an urgency that took her breath away, his hands holding her face as if he were afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Ilara's heart exploded, her knees going weak as she sank into him, her hands clutching his jacket to steady herself. His body was warm, solid, grounding, and she melted into him, her walls crumbling, her defenses shattering. His lips were soft but firm, his kiss hungry, consuming, filled with all the emotions he had kept bottled up inside. Ilara felt everything in that kiss, his frustration, his longing, his fear, his hope. It was raw, real, and it broke her heart even as it healed her. The world around them ceased to exist. She forgot the hotel, the investors, the whispers, the pain, the doubt. She forgot everything except the feel of his lips on hers, the way he held her so tightly, so protectively, the way his body pressed against hers as if he couldn't bear to be apart. The night air was cold, the wind biting at her skin, but his touch was fire, burning away everything that didn't matter. She kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her fear, her hope, her pain, her longing into that kiss, letting him see her, feel her, understand her. It was messy, unsteady, imperfect, but it was real. It was them. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, their foreheads touching, their eyes closed, their bodies trembling. Lucian's hands were still cradling her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks as he struggled to catch his breath. "Ilara!" Her heart ached at the sound of her name on his lips, his voice raw and vulnerable. "Yeah?" His eyes opened, locking onto hers, his gaze intense, searching. "Don't run away from me again." Ilara felt tears prick at her eyes, her chest tightening. "I won't, not anymore." Lucian's face softened, his eyes reflecting a pain she recognized all too well. "Good, because I don't think I could let you go this time." Ilara's heart shattered and healed all at once. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his, her voice breaking. Then don't. Lucian's breath hitched, his hands tightening on her face. I won't. And then he kissed her again, softly, tenderly, lovingly, and for the first time, Elara didn't feel the urge to run. She felt safe, she felt wanted, she felt home. When they finally pulled away, Elara's heart was still racing, her breath coming in soft, uneven gasps. Her face was flushed, her lips tingling from his kiss, her emotions a chaotic whirlwind inside her. Lucian didn't let go. He rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face, his eyes closed, his breathing just as unsteady as hers. A smile played on his lips, soft and vulnerable, a look she had never seen on him before. Finally! Elara let out a breathless laugh, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Finally! They stood there for a moment, wrapped up in each other, the world around them fading away. The cold night air didn't matter. The city lights below, nothing mattered except the man standing in front of her. But deep down, Elara knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready. Elara couldn't stop smiling. Ever since Lucian kissed her, everything around her seemed different. Like somehow the world had changed color. Paris looked brighter, the air felt warmer, and everything seemed just a little more beautiful. She had never imagined she'd be here. She never imagined she'd fall for someone like Lucian Scott, a man who was so different from her, who came from a world she didn't understand, who could break her heart with just one word. But it happened, and for the first time, she didn't want to run away. She was done running. The next morning, Elara went downstairs for breakfast, her heart racing with anticipation. She didn't know what to expect. Would he pretend nothing happened? Would he act cold and distant, pretending he didn't feel the same way she did? She walked into the restaurant, scanning the room, her heart pounding. And then she saw him. Lucian was sitting at a table reserved for them, his posture relaxed, his suit immaculate, his eyes focused on his phone. But the moment he saw her, his face softened, his lips curving into a warm, genuine smile. "Good morning, Collins." Elara's heart skipped a beat, her chest tightening as she walked over and sat down across from him. "Good morning." Lucian's smile didn't falter. "You're in a good mood." She tilted her head, raising an eyebrow. "Are you surprised?" He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Let's just say, it's unusual." Elara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. "Well, maybe you're rubbing off on me." Lucian smirked, his gaze never leaving hers. "That would be a first." Elara's heart fluttered, her cheeks warming. She reached for a piece of toast, trying to hide her smile as she took a bite. They ate in comfortable silence, the atmosphere between them warm, easy, relaxed. There was no tension, no awkwardness, no doubt. For the first time it felt natural. But then Lucian set his coffee cup aside, his eyes growing serious. "So, how do you feel after last night?" Elara's heart skipped a beat, her chest tightening. She looked down at her plate, her fingers fidgeting with her napkin. To be honest, still a bit confused. Lucian's brow furrowed. Confused? She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I've never done this before, Lucian. I've never let anyone get this close." His expression softened, his eyes reflecting an emotion she didn't expect. "Me neither." Elara's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening. Lucian always seemed so confident, so sure of himself. She never imagined he could be just as lost, just as scared, just as vulnerable as she was. "So, does that mean we're—" Her voice faltered, her cheeks flushing. Lucian's lips twitched, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Together?" Elara swallowed, her heart racing. "Yes." Lucian leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. His expression was calm, confident, his eyes steady. "If you want to be, Collins." Elara's chest tightened, a thrill of hope rushing through her. She took a deep breath, her voice steady. "I do." Lucien's face softened, his eyes shimmering with warmth. "Good." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. His hand was warm, his grip firm, grounding. He gently squeezed her hand, his touch sending shivers down her spine. Elara felt her heart race, her cheeks flushing as she looked down at their intertwined fingers. She felt safe. She felt wanted. She felt... But deep down, she knew the battle wasn't over. They were from different worlds, different lives, different paths. There were still people who wanted to tear them apart, who would do anything to see them fail. There were still challenges waiting for them, obstacles they would have to face, battles they would have to fight. But this time she wouldn't run. This time she would stand and fight. Because for the first time she had something worth fighting for. She looked up at Lucian, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't name. "So, what now?" Lucian's lips curved into a wicked smile, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Now? Now we show them that we don't play by their rules?" Alara laughed, her chest feeling light, free. "You really do love breaking the rules, don't you?" Lucian leaned closer, his voice low, his eyes darkening. "Only when it comes to you." Alara's heart raced, her breath catching. "You really are dangerous, Lucian Scott." Lucian's smile widened, his gaze locking onto hers. "And you love it." Alara's laughter was warm, genuine, real. "Yeah, I do." They sat there, their fingers intertwined, their hearts pounding, their worlds colliding. They were from different worlds, but they were together, and that was all that mattered. Dylan's world wasn't an easy place. It was a world of power and privilege, of whispers behind closed doors and smiles that hid knives. A world where status meant everything, where reputations were built on perception rather than truth. And some people weren't happy to see them together. That afternoon, as Alara walked through the hotel, she felt a chill run down her spine. She was used to the whispers. Since the beginning of the trip, people had been talking about her, watching her every move, judging her as if she were an outsider who didn't belong. But today, something was different. The looks were sharper, the stares lingered longer, their eyes cold, malicious. It felt like the entire hotel was holding its breath, waiting for her to break. She walked past the reception, her shoulders straight, her head high, refusing to show any weakness. But then she heard two women talking, their voices low, conspiratorial. "Did you see the news?" "Yeah, it's a scandal." Alara's heart skipped a beat, her stomach tightening. What are they talking about? She walked a little faster, her hands trembling as she pulled out her phone. She opened her browser, her fingers shaking as she typed in Lucian's name. The second she saw the headline, she felt her blood run cold. CEO Lucian Scott involved in scandalous romance with former housekeeping employee. Alara's mouth went dry, her heart pounding as she clicked on the article. Her vision blurred as she read the words, her chest tightening with every sentence. According to insider sources, Alara Collins, former maid at the Scott Hotel, was taken on a luxurious trip to Paris and promoted under suspicious circumstances. Sources say the young woman may be using her relationship with the CEO to advance in life. Her hands trembled, her eyes burning as she continued to read. Some speculate that this relationship is nothing more than a calculated move by Collins to secure her future, using Scott's influence and power to elevate herself. Alara felt her breath quicken, her chest tightening as she scrolled through the article. There were photos of her and Lucian together, leaving the hotel, attending events, walking side by side. They looked innocent enough, but paired with the article's narrative, they looked scandalous. The words were brutal, cruel, tearing her apart. They didn't just question her relationship with Lucian. They questioned her integrity, her worth, her character. She felt sick. Her phone buzzed, and she nearly dropped it. She looked down, her vision still blurry as she saw the message. "Lucian, where are you?" She swallowed hard, her fingers shaking as she typed out a reply. "Alara." At the reception, a few minutes later, Lucian appeared, his presence commanding, his face dark with fury. He was holding his phone, his eyes blazing as he walked up to her. He didn't say a word, he just pulled her into a quiet corner, his jaw clenched, his shoulders tense. Alara could feel the anger radiating off him, his entire body rigid with controlled rage. "I'm going to find out who did this," he said, his voice low, dangerous. Alara let out a bitter laugh, her voice shaking. "Do you really need to find out?" Lucian's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharp. "What do you mean?" Alara crossed her arms, her shoulders stiff. "This has Lyra's name written all over it." Lucian's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. "I figured that." Alara's chest tightened, her hands trembling as she tried to keep her voice steady. "I knew people would talk, but this This is different. This is a direct attack." Lucian's expression softened, his eyes reflecting a pain she didn't expect. "I'm sorry. I didn't think they'd go this far." Ilara looked away, her vision blurring. "They don't care about the truth. They just want to ruin us." Lucian stepped closer, his voice firm. "They won't succeed." Ilara looked up at him, her chest aching. "How do you know that?" Lucian's gaze was steady, his voice unshakable. "Because I won't let them." He took her hand, his grip warm, grounding. "I'll take care of it." Ilara's heart ached, her throat tightening. "How?" Lucian's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "My way." That night, Lucian called a press conference at the hotel. Ilara didn't know what to expect. She didn't know what he was planning or how he intended to handle the scandal. All she knew was that she trusted him. When she entered the conference room, her heart dropped. It was packed. Reporters filled every corner, cameras flashing, microphones held high, their faces eager, hungry for a story. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. But then she saw Lucian on stage. He stood there, tall and confident, his posture steady, his expression calm. He looked unshakable, powerful, invincible. The room went silent as he approached the microphone, his presence commanding, his gaze sharp. Lucian cleared his throat, his voice steady and controlled. "Good evening. I called this press conference to address the rumors and accusations that have been circulating." The flashes intensified, cameras zooming in, reporters leaning forward, their pens poised. Lucian's gaze was cold, piercing. "There has been a lot of speculation about my relationship with Ilara Collins. I want to make one thing clear. Every word of that article is a lie." A murmur rippled through the room, but Lucian didn't waver. His voice grew stronger, his eyes hardening. "Ilara Collins is one of the most talented, intelligent, and honest people I have ever met. Her accomplishments are her own, earned through hard work, dedication, and skill. Anyone who questions her integrity is questioning mine." Ilara's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding. Lucian's eyes scanned the room, his voice firm. "I brought her to Paris because she is the best at what she does. Not because of any relationship, but because of her talent, and I will not tolerate anyone undermining her achievements or her character." The room was silent, every eye glued to him, every ear hanging on his words. Lucian's voice lowered, his tone dangerous. "As for the rumors about our personal relationship, yes, we are together, and it's none of your business." The room erupted, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, but Lucian didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his gaze unyielding. "Ilara Collins is in my life because I chose her, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me." His words hung in the air, heavy and unbreakable. Ilara's heart shattered and healed all at once. Her chest tightened, her vision blurring, her emotions overwhelming. Lucian's eyes softened, his gaze finding hers across the room. "And just for the record, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The world around them disappeared. Ilara's heart raced, her breath catching, and for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt wanted. She felt safe. She felt home. "I know a lot of you are here because of the rumors about me and Ilara Collins, so let me clear something up." The room went dead silent. Every camera was pointed at him, every microphone angled to catch his every word. Reporters leaned forward, their pens poised, their eyes wide with anticipation. Lucian's posture was strong, unshakable, his face calm and composed, but his eyes were fierce, burning with a fire Ilara had never seen before. He was a man who wasn't just defending himself, he was protecting something precious. He looked directly at the cameras, his voice steady and controlled. "Ilara Collins wasn't promoted because of a relationship with me. She was promoted because she has undeniable talent, and because she's proven, over and over, that she deserves her place in this world." Ilara felt a lump in her throat, her heart aching at the conviction in his words. Her vision blurred, her chest tightening. He was fighting for her, in front of the world, Lucian continued, his gaze hardening. "And for those of you who think this is some kind of scandal," he let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing as he spoke the next words with chilling calmness. "I don't care." The reporters exchanged surprised glances, their pens freezing mid-air, their mouths dropping open. Lucian's voice grew stronger, his eyes piercing. I've never been afraid of public opinion, and I'm not going to start now. Then, he looked directly at her, right at her. His gaze softened, his eyes reflecting emotions he didn't bother to hide. I chose to be with her. And I'm not going to apologize for that. Ilara's heart shattered and healed all at once. Her eyes burned, her chest tightening, as the weight of his words hit her. He was putting everything on the line for her. His reputation, his image, his power. And in that moment, she realized, it didn't matter what they said, it didn't matter what they tried to do. They would face it. Together. When the press conference ended, the reporters were still buzzing with questions, their cameras flashing, their voices echoing through the room. But Lucian didn't stick around to answer them. He walked straight to Ilara, his steps purposeful, his gaze locked on hers. He stopped in front of her, his expression softening, his shoulders relaxing as he looked her up and down. What did you think? He asked, his voice low, his eyes searching hers. Ilara let out a breathless laugh, her heart racing. You're completely crazy. Lucian's lips curved into a sly smile. I've been told that before. Ilara shook her head, her vision blurring as tears pricked at her eyes. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to risk everything for me. Lucian's face softened, his gaze unwavering. I did, because I won't let anyone question your worth. Not now, not ever. Ilara's chest tightened, her throat aching as she looked up at him, her emotions threatening to spill over. She cupped his face in her hands, her fingers trembling. You really are impossible. Lucian's eyes gleamed with warmth, his hands resting on her waist as he pulled her closer. And you're still here? Ilara smiled, her heart pounding as she looked into his eyes. Always. And then, without caring about the flashing cameras, without caring who was watching, she kissed him. It was a soft, tender kiss, filled with all the words she couldn't say, all the emotions she couldn't express. Her body melted into his, her heart racing, her chest tightening as his lips moved gently against hers. The world around them faded away. Because for the first time, Ilara knew she belonged there, and no one was going to take that from her. Ilara never thought her life could change so much in such a short time. A few weeks ago, she was just a cleaning staff member, working long hours, barely scraping by, living day to day. Now, she was in Paris, in Lucian Scott's arms. Her name splashed across the headlines as the woman who won over the billionaire CEO. What once seemed like a distant dream, an impossible fantasy, was now her reality. And she had no regrets. The morning after the press conference, Ilara woke up to her phone buzzing non-stop. Messages from Celine, from the hotel staff, from numbers she didn't recognize. Some congratulated her, calling her brave, strong, inspiring. Others were cruel, hateful, accusing her of being an opportunist, of using Lucian for her own gain. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that, for the first time, she didn't feel alone. When she went down for breakfast, she found Lucian waiting for her. He was sitting at a table reserved for them, as always. But this time, he seemed different, more relaxed, more at ease, his posture comfortable, his face open. Did you sleep well? He asked, his eyes gleaming as she sat down. Ilara grabbed a cup of coffee, her heart racing as she looked at him. Better than the past few nights. I bet your name's in every newspaper. Ilara rolled her eyes, taking a sip of her coffee. You really know how to make things complicated, don't you? Lucian smirked, his eyes dancing with mischief. Always. Ilara laughed, her heart feeling light, free. But her smile faded when she saw a familiar figure entering the restaurant, Lyra. She looked flawless, as always, her blonde hair perfect, her dress immaculate. But her eyes were colder than ever, her gaze sharp as she walked straight to their table. She stopped beside Lucian, her posture rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. Can we talk? Lucian leaned back, his expression indifferent. If it's another one of your speeches, I'm not interested. Lyra's face tightened. But she looked at Ilara, her eyes narrowing. It's not a speech. I just want to clear a few things up. Ilara crossed her arms, her expression cold. Now you want to talk? After trying to ruin my life? Lyra's shoulders stiffened, her jaw clenching. It wasn't personal. Ilara laughed, her voice bitter. Oh really? Publicly humiliating me was just business? Ilara looked away, her face hardening. This world doesn't accept change easily. And you changed the rules. But even though you won this battle, you need to understand. There will always be people trying to bring you down. Ilara's eyes didn't waver. Then, I'll fight them. Lyra's lips curved into a bitter smile. I figured you'd say that. She looked at Lucien, her face softening. Good luck to both of you. She turned and walked away, her head high, her posture perfect. Ilara let out the breath she'd been holding, her shoulders relaxing. Lucien took her hand, his grip firm, warm. Are you okay? Ilara looked at him, her heart swelling. Yes, because I know that no matter what happens, we'll face it together. Lucien's eyes softened, his fingers tightening around hers. Together. And in that moment, Ilara knew nothing could bring them down. The last day in Paris flew by in a whirlwind of events, meetings, and goodbyes. Ilara felt a sense of nostalgia wash over her as she moved through the bustling rooms, filled with influential people, tasting the most exquisite dishes, listening to the praise and compliments that were once unimaginable to her. But something had changed. She was no longer seen as an outsider. People were starting to respect her. They didn't just see her as Lucien Scott's girlfriend. They saw her as an expert, a woman with a rare talent, someone who deserved to be there on her own merits. And for the first time, she believed it too. On their last night in Paris, Lucien took her to dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. The setting was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting a golden glow over the elegantly decorated room. Soft music played in the background, creating an ambiance of intimacy and sophistication. The food was flawless, a masterpiece of flavors and textures that left Ilara speechless. But even in the midst of all that luxury, her attention was focused solely on the man sitting across from her. Lucien looked relaxed, his posture comfortable, his eyes gleaming with warmth as he watched her. He wore his confidence effortlessly, his smile genuine, his presence magnetic. "What happens when we go home?" Ilara asked, her voice soft, her gaze searching his face. Lucien's expression grew thoughtful. He held his wine glass delicately, swirling the liquid before meeting her eyes. "Do you want to go back to the hotel?" Ilara hesitated, her chest tightening. She had worked so hard to carve out her space in the hotel, to build a life for herself. But now, everything was different. "I love what I do," she admitted, her voice low, "but I think I'm ready for something new." Lucien's eyes softened, his lips curving into a gentle smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. "Oh?" He set his glass down on the table and reached across, taking her hand in his. His fingers were warm, grounding, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "I have a proposal." Ilara raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "I'm listening." Lucien's expression grew serious, his gaze never leaving hers. "Work with me. Not as a hotel employee, but as my partner." Ilara's breath caught, her eyes widening. "Partner, you have talent, Ilara. Raw, undeniable talent. You see things that others don't. You have a gift, and I don't want that gift to be wasted." His voice softened, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I want us to create something together. Something new, something that's ours." Ilara's heart raced, her chest tightening. She could hardly breathe. "Are you serious?" Lucien's eyes darkened, his voice low. "I never say anything I don't mean." Ilara's mind spun, 1,000 thoughts rushing through her head. This was huge. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. Freedom, creativity, recognition. But it was also terrifying. It meant stepping into the unknown, risking everything she'd built. But as she looked into Lucien's eyes, her fear melted away. She trusted him. She believed in him. And more than anything, she believed in herself. Taking a deep breath, she tightened her fingers around his. "I accept." Lucien's face broke into a radiant smile, his eyes gleaming with pride. "I knew you would." Ilara laughed, her heart feeling light, free. "You sound so sure of yourself." Lucien's voice was soft, his eyes warm. "I was sure of you." Her chest tightened, her vision blurring. She squeezed his hand, her voice breaking. "Thank you." Lucien leaned forward, his face close to hers, his gaze intense. "No, Ilara, thank you." They toasted to new beginnings, their glasses clinking softly, their eyes locked. And that night, Ilara knew her life would never be the same. The plane touched down smoothly, the city skyline coming into view as the private jet descended. Ilara took a deep breath as she stepped off the jet, the familiar air wrapping around her like a warm embrace. She was back home, but nothing felt the same. Her life had changed. She had changed. She looked over at Lucian, who was standing beside her, his face calm, his eyes sparkling. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, his grip steady. "Are you ready to start this new chapter?" Ilara looked up at him, her chest tightening. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." Lucian's lips curved into a mischievous smile. "Good, because I don't plan on slowing down." Ilara laughed, her heart fluttering. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Lucian pulled her close, his eyes darkening. "And hold on tight, Collins." He leaned in and kissed her, deep and passionate, his lips claiming hers, his hands cradling her face. Ilara melted into him, her heart racing, her body trembling as she kissed him back, her fingers curling into his jacket. She didn't care about the world around them. She didn't care who was watching. All that mattered was this moment. And as his lips moved against hers, as his hands held her so protectively, Ilara knew her destiny was never just about cleaning hotel rooms. Her destiny was beside Lucian. In the months that followed, Ilara's life transformed completely. She worked alongside Lucian, learning the ins and outs of the industry, traveling to international events, meeting influential people, tasting dishes she had only dreamed of. They created an innovative project within the Scott Hotel empire, combining her unique palate with his business acumen, revolutionizing the culinary experience. They were unstoppable, a force to be reckoned with, but more than the success, more than the fame, more than the power, they had each other. They fought, they laughed, they loved. They faced every challenge together, standing side by side, unbreakable. And Ilara was happy. She was truly, deeply happy. She had everything she had ever dreamed of, or at least, that's what she thought, because Lucian Scott still knew how to surprise her, and that night, he was about to prove it. It was a special night. Ilara didn't know why, but she could feel it the moment they stepped into the restaurant. The place was breathtaking, elegant and intimate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sea. Soft golden lights bathed the room, reflecting off the crystal glasses and polished silverware. Outside, the waves gently lapped against the shore, the sound blending perfectly with the soft melody of the violinist playing in the corner. A warm breeze drifted in through the open windows, carrying the scent of saltwater and jasmine. Everything felt magical, almost unreal. And at the center of it all was Lucian, sitting across from her at a table reserved just for them. He looked devastatingly handsome, his tailored suit fitting him perfectly, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. But something was different about him tonight. He was quiet, unusually quiet. Ilara tilted her head, watching him curiously. "You're unusually quiet." Lucian held his wineglass, his fingers turning the stem slowly as he looked at her, his gaze soft, his lips curving into a small, almost secretive smile. "Maybe because I'm waiting for the right moment." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The right moment for what? Lucian's eyes sparkled with mischief, his smile widening. "Just wait." Before she could ask anything else, the violinist moved closer, the music growing louder, more beautiful, more romantic. Ilara looked around, her heart racing, her fingers tingling. Something was different tonight, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Her eyes returned to Lucian and she saw it. The tension in his posture, the way his shoulders were slightly stiff, the way his fingers tightened around his glass. Her breath caught in her throat. Lucian, he took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, warm and grounding. "Collins." Ilara's heart raced, her chest tightening. He never used her first name. Lucian's expression softened, his eyes shimmering with emotions she didn't understand. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Ilara's lips curved into a soft smile, her chest tightening with nostalgia. "Hard to forget. I was sleeping in your bathroom." Lucian's shoulders relaxed, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "Yes. And at that moment, I knew my life would never be the same." Ilara's heart skipped a beat, her breath catch. "Lucian." His eyes darkened, his voice lowering. You turned my world upside down. You challenged me from day one. You made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how. You showed me that life is so much more than work and status. You taught me how to live." Ilara's vision blurred, her chest tightening. Tears pricked at her eyes, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Lucian stood up, his chair scraping softly against the floor as he reached into his pocket. Ilara's breath caught. Time seemed to slow down. Lucian pulled out a small velvet box, his fingers trembling just a little as he held it. Ilara's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth, her heart racing. All the guests in the restaurant went silent. Lucian took a deep breath, his face vulnerable, his eyes shining as he sank down on one knee. Ilara's world spun. Everything around her faded away. There was only him. Lucian looked up at her, his gaze unwavering, his voice steady but soft. "I'm not the easiest man in the world. I'm stubborn, arrogant, and set in my ways. But if there's one thing I've learned since you came into my life," he took a shaky breath, his voice cracking, "it's that I don't want a future without you." Ilara's lips trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks, her vision blurring. Lucian's eyes softened, his own tears shimmering as he opened the box, revealing the most beautiful ring she had ever seen. It was elegant and timeless, a sparkling diamond set in a delicate band, shimmering under the golden light. The entire room held its breath. Lucian's voice was low, raw, vulnerable. "Ilara Collins, will you marry me?" Ilara's heart shattered and healed all at once. Her world spun, her chest tightening, her breath catching as the tears continued to fall. Her hands trembled, her body shaking, her emotions overwhelming. She tried to speak, but her voice broke, her throat aching as she looked down at him. At the man who had turned her world upside down. At the man who had broken through every wall she had built. At the man she loved more than anything in the world. Her lips trembled as she finally found her voice, her heart pounding, her words a whisper. "Yes." Lucian's face broke into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. His shoulders relaxed, his body sagging with relief as he laughed, his eyes shining with pure joy. He took her hand, his fingers trembling as he slipped the ring onto her finger, his touch gentle, reverent. The diamond sparkled, catching the light, a perfect fit. Ilara stared at the ring, her vision blurred, her heart racing. It was beautiful, breathtaking, but it wasn't just about the ring. It was about everything it meant. It was about the promise, the future, the life they would build together. Lucian stood up, his hands cupping her face as he leaned in, his lips brushing hers. His kiss was soft, tender, filled with love and hope and promise. The restaurant erupted into applause, the guests cheering, the violinist playing a triumphant melody, but Ilara didn't hear any of it. All she heard was the beating of his heart against hers. All she felt was his arms wrapped around her, his body warm and solid, grounding her, protecting her. All she saw was his face, his eyes shimmering with love, his smile bright and beautiful. Lucian pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, his voice a whisper. "You have no idea how much I love you." Ilara's chest tightened, her heart aching as she looked up at him, her tears falling freely. "I love you too, more than anything." Lucian's face softened, his eyes shimmering. "Then stay by my side." "Forever," Ilara's breath hitched, her heart swelling as she smiled through her tears. "Forever." Lucian kissed her again, his lips warm and soft, his arms holding her close. And in that moment, Ilara knew that her destiny wasn't just to stand beside him. Her destiny was to love him. Forever. Lucian smiled, his eyes shimmering with tears. He didn't bother to hide. He took her hand, his touch gentle, his fingers steady as he slid the ring onto her finger. The diamond sparkled, catching the golden light, a perfect symbol of everything they had been through. Every fight, every struggle, every moment that had led them to this. Lucian stood up, his movements slow, reverent, his eyes never leaving hers. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch warm, grounding, his fingers brushing away her tears. His eyes softened, his voice a whisper. "You have no idea how much I love you." Ilara's heart shattered and healed all at once. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred, her body trembling as she looked up at him, her lips curving into a smile. "I love you too." Lucien's face broke into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen, and then he kissed her, with all the emotion he felt. with all the love he had kept locked away, with everything he was and everything he would ever be. The restaurant erupted in applause, the guests cheering, the violinist playing a triumphant melody, but Elara didn't hear any of it. All she felt was him, his lips moving softly against hers, his hands holding her face, his body grounding her, him and the love that filled her entire heart. 2 months later, Elara was walking down the aisle of a flower-filled garden. Dressed in white, the delicate lace of her gown trailing behind her, shimmering softly under the golden light. Her hair was swept back, soft curls framing her face, a delicate veil cascading down her back. She held a bouquet of white roses and lilies, her fingers trembling as she clutched the delicate flowers. The wedding took place outdoors, at a private estate with a breathtaking view of the sea. The garden was adorned with thousands of flowers, roses, peonies, orchids, each petal glowing softly under the golden sunlight. The golden sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink, orange, and gold. The sea sparkled below, the waves gently lapping against the shore, a soft breeze carrying the scent of salt water and flowers. It was a scene straight out of a fairy tale, but none of it compared to the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle. Lucien, he was standing there, dressed in an elegant black suit, perfectly tailored, his hair neatly styled, his posture confident, his shoulders straight. But his face was vulnerable, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, his lips curved into the softest smile. And his gaze was filled with so much love that Elara felt her heart shatter. Her breath caught, her chest tightening, her vision blurring as she took another step forward, her father guiding her down the aisle. Each step she took was a reminder of the journey she had made to get here, where she started, what she had faced. And how, against all expectations, love found a way to transform her. As she reached the altar, her father placed her hand in Lucien's, his fingers warm and steady. Lucien looked down at her, his eyes soft, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You look beautiful." Elara's lips trembled, her chest tightening. "And you're officially stuck with me forever." Lucien's face softened, his eyes shimmering with tears as he let out a choked laugh, and I couldn't be happier about that. He squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, his touch gentle, protective. The ceremony was emotional, intimate, perfect. They stood under an arch of white roses and greenery, surrounded by their closest friends and family, the sun setting behind them, casting a golden glow over the scene. They exchanged heartfelt vows, promises of eternal love, of unwavering loyalty, of standing by each other's side no matter what. Elara's voice broke as she spoke, her hands trembling as she held his, her chest tightening with every word. "You showed me how to love. You showed me how to live, and for that, I promise to stand by your side forever. In every moment, in every heartbeat. Always." Lucien's voice was raw, his eyes shimmering as he looked down at her, his hands holding hers. "You broke down every wall I built. You made me feel alive. And I promise to love you for the rest of my life. For every sunrise and every sunset. Forever." Tears streamed down her face, her heart aching, her soul soaring. And in the end, the officiant smiled, his voice warm as he announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Lucien didn't wait a second. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, his hands cradling her face as he kissed her deeply. The guests erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the garden, flower petals raining down on them, a shower of white and pink, delicate and beautiful. Elara clung to him, her hands fisting his jacket, her heart racing as she kissed him back, her lips moving softly against his. The world around them disappeared. There was only him, and the love that filled her entire heart. 2 weeks after the wedding, Elara stood in the bedroom, her hands trembling, her heart racing as she stared at the object in her hand, a pregnancy test. She blinked, her vision blurring, her breath catching in her throat as she looked down at the small screen. 2 lines to her heart skipped a beat, her chest tightening as she stared at the lines, her hands shaking. "Oh my God!" Her voice was a whisper, barely audible, her fingers trembling as she clutched the test, her body trembling with shock. She was pregnant. A mix of emotions surged through her: shock, disbelief, joy, fear, excitement. Her heart raced, her vision blurring as tears filled her eyes, her body shaking as she tried to catch her breath. She and Lucian were going to have a baby. A tear slid down her cheek, her lips trembling as a choked laugh escaped her. "Oh my God!" She sank down onto the bed, her hands shaking, her chest aching as the realization hit her. She was going to be a mother! And Lucian was going to be a father. Her heart swelled, her vision blurring as she looked down at the test, her fingers brushing over the lines. They were going to be a family. She took a deep breath, her chest tightening as she looked up, her eyes shining with tears. And for the first time, she realized that her journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. When she heard the bedroom door open, Elara quickly turned. Her heart was pounding, her hands still trembling as she clutched the pregnancy test, her mind spinning, her emotions a chaotic whirlwind. Lucian walked in, his presence commanding as always, his face relaxed, his posture confident. He held an envelope in his hand, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Collins, you need to see this. I just got an invite to..." He stopped mid-sentence, his voice trailing off as he noticed her expression. His face softened, his brows furrowing as he looked at her, concern flooding his eyes. "What's wrong?" Elara's breath caught, her chest tightening, her vision blurring as she looked at him, her heart racing. She had practiced this moment in her head 1,000 times. She had imagined a million ways to tell him, a million words to say, but now, standing in front of him, she was speechless. Her fingers trembled as she looked down at the test in her hand, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she held it out to him. Lucian's eyes dropped to the object in her hand, his face confused, his brows knitting together as he took a step closer. He looked at the test, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process what he was seeing. He blinked once, then twice. His expression shifted from confusion to shock, his jaw dropping, his eyes widening, his mouth opened, his voice a whisper. "Is this?" Elara's heart skipped a beat, her chest tightening as she gave him a shaky smile, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Yeah." For a moment, Lucian stood completely still, his body frozen, his face blank with shock. Then his shoulders sagged, his eyes flooding with emotion, his lips trembling as he took a shaky breath. He took a step forward, his movements slow, reverent, his hands reaching out. He cupped her face in his hands, his fingers warm, grounding, his touch gentle as his eyes locked onto hers, his voice cracked. We're having a baby?" Elara's vision blurred, her chest tightening as tears spilled down her cheeks. She let out a choked laugh, her heart racing. "We are." Lucian's breath hitched, his eyes filling with tears, his face breaking into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. His shoulders shook, his body trembling as he let out a choked laugh, his lips curving into a grin that lit up his entire face. He leaned in and kissed her, with indescribable emotion. It was soft, tender, filled with so much love that Elara felt her heart shatter. His lips moved against hers with a reverence, a gentleness, his hands holding her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She kissed him back, her hands fisting his shirt, her body trembling as she melted into him, her chest tightening, her heart soaring. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were shining with tears, his face open, vulnerable, filled with so much love it took her breath away. "We're having a baby," he whispered, his voice breaking, his eyes shimmering. "We're going to be parents." Elara let out a soft laugh, her chest overflowing with happiness, her heart pounding. "We are." Lucian's face crumbled, his shoulders shaking as he laughed, his body trembling as he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into his chest. His grip was firm, protective, his body warm, solid, grounding. He buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking as he held her close. His voice a whisper. "I can't believe it. I can't believe this is real." Elara laughed, her chest tightening as she leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "I know. I can't believe it either." Lucian's arms tightened around her, his voice breaking. "I love you. God, I love you so much." Elara's heart raced, her vision blurring as she looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with tears. "I love you too." Lucian looked down at her, his eyes soft, his face filled with awe as he reached down and placed his hand on her stomach, his fingers trembling. His voice was soft, reverent. "There's a baby, our baby, growing in there." Elara's chest tightened, her heart swelling as she covered his hand with hers, her fingers lacing through his. "Yes, Lucian's eyes flooded with emotion, his shoulders shaking as he let out a choked laugh, his face lighting up. "I'm gonna be a dad." Ilara's heart melted, her chest tightening as she leaned up and kissed him softly, her lips brushing his. "And you're gonna be the best dad in the world." Lucian's eyes softened, his face glowing with joy. "And you're gonna be an incredible mom." Tears fell freely down Ilara's face, her chest aching as she looked up at him, her heart bursting with love. "We're going to be a family." Lucian's face softened, his eyes shimmering. "Yeah, we are." He kissed her again, his lips warm and soft, his hands cradling her face. And in that moment, Ilara knew this was just the beginning of a new adventure, a new phase of love, growth, and happiness. But this time, it wasn't just her and Lucian. Now, they were a family. Ilara and Lucian's story was an emotional roller coaster, filled with humor, heartache, triumph, and above all, love. From their hilarious and unconventional first meeting to the intense challenges they faced together, this story beautifully captured the journey of two people from completely different worlds finding each other and building a life together. The character development was outstanding. Ilara's growth from a hardworking, underestimated housekeeper to a confident, respected woman who found her voice and her place in the world was inspiring. Her journey was filled with moments of doubt, fear, and struggle, but her resilience and determination made her victory so much sweeter. Lucian's transformation was equally powerful. The stoic, guarded CEO who thought he had everything learned that wealth and power meant nothing without love and happiness. His vulnerability, his willingness to fight for Ilara, and his journey from skepticism to unconditional love were beautifully portrayed. The story didn't shy away from difficult moments, facing societal judgment, dealing with jealousy and manipulation, and overcoming internal fears and insecurities. Yet it was also filled with humor, passion, and heartwarming moments that made their love feel real and relatable. The climax of the proposal was breathtaking. The wedding was a fairy tale brought to life, and the revelation of Ilara's pregnancy was the perfect way to close this chapter while opening a new one full of possibilities. Final thoughts. This wasn't just a love story. It was a story of growth, acceptance, and the power of believing in yourself and each other. It showed that love isn't about perfection, but about standing by each other through every challenge and embracing each other's flaws. Ilara and Lucian's journey was unforgettable, and their love story will stay in the hearts of readers long after the final page. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to follow all of our emotional and heartwarming tales. And for more beautiful stories, click here on the final screen.